Good afternoon, folks. Can I have your attention, please? First of all, I'd like to remind everyone, please make sure you know where your exit doors are. The bathrooms are behind you, through the back doors, straight across the hall. Please take the time right now to turn off cell phones. And I was asked to remind that our volunteers will be passing petitions to be signed, volunteer cards if anyone wants to volunteer and join, and there will be a donation boxes that will be passed along too. Excuse me. I was asked to speak today by Mary Ann Kowalski. She said I was chosen because I'm not a newcomer. Well, that's a fact, folks. I was born and raised in Seneca County, and I actually graduated from this very school. I've seen how Seneca County and the entire Finger Lakes region has flourished over these past few years. We have connected our agricultural community with our tourism community, which includes our wineries, our breweries, our cider mills, and our cheese trails. The 11 Finger Lakes, we have now been trademarked as agritourism. One word, one goal, with a very thriving economic future. The 11 Finger Lakes, our state parks, our gorges, our waterfalls, our bike and walking trails have no room, nor do we want to share our land or airspace with anything related to waste. We must all stand together. There is power in numbers and powers in the people. I would like right now to ask any elected officials that are here in this room present to please stand. Any elected officials from this region? I would like to thank you for being present today, and I would like to say to you, the people, you have elected these people, please hold them accountable. You need to attend planning, town and county board meetings. You need to get on agendas. You need to speak, and you need to spread the word. Become involved and stay involved. Protect our beautiful landscape, not only for today, but for our future. I want to thank the following groups and organizations for sponsoring today's event. The Romulus Residents Opposed to Trash Trains, the Seneca Lake Guardian, the Finger Lakes Wine Business Coalition, the Sierra Club, the Atlanta chapter, the Sierra Club, the Finger Lakes Group, the Seneca Jet Do, the Finger Lakes Zero Waste, Seneca Falls Environmental Action Committee, and the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. I, at this time, would also like to thank and applaud the Romulus Town Planning Board and the Romulus Town Board for doing their due diligence regarding this project. It is now my privilege and great pleasure to introduce to you Judith Enck. She is a woman with many accomplishments. Judith is from the Rensselaer County, and she was a regional administrator for the United States Environmental Protection Agency from 2009 to 2017. She was in charge of the EPA region that included New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. She has more than 37 years of experience in the environmental field. Prior to joining the governor's office in 2007, she was the environmental policy advisor for 8 years to the state attorney general office. She was executive director of the Environmental Advocates of New York and senior environmental associate with the New York Public Interest Research Group. Let's give her a warm welcome, and thank you, Judith, for taking your time to come.
Hi, everyone. I want to start by taking your picture because I want to tweet it. So everyone wave to me. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Twitter can be a force for good. Very nonpartisan. So I'm very optimistic that you all are going to succeed here because for one thing, I was tossing and turning all night and wondering, will my car start? And eventually it did. So that's a minor miracle. And the fact that so many of you have come out to engage in the democratic process is really impressive. Folks in the back, feel free to come and take a seat. This is like church, and there will be a collection. Lots of empty seats in the front. And what I want to kick this off with is a question for each and every one of you. What do you want the Finger Lakes to look like? What do you want this town to look like? What do you want the region to look like? Not just today, but in 2 years, in 5 years. We know that economic development projects come up and a lot are worthy of support. They have the potential to create jobs, to supplement the local tax base, but at what cost? We recently learned about a proposed garbage incinerator to be built at the Seneca Army Depot here. And if this project is approved, this is what this community will look like. 238 garbage trucks every day, bringing in waste from who knows where, we don't know where, but distant areas, and maybe even trash trains. Once the trucks arrive at the incinerator, roughly 2,640 tons of garbage would be burned every single day, making this the largest trash incinerator in the state. You will see a 260-foot smokestack that will be visible for miles and miles on the horizon. And that smokestack would release a wide range of pollutants, heavy metals like mercury and lead, acid gases. When you burn plastic, you inevitably release dioxin into the air. And then also nitrogen oxides, which are very damaging to grapes. Garbage incinerators are also a major source of carbon emissions, the very pollutants that cause climate change. In fact, if you look at data on how much electricity is generated from burning garbage compared to coal, more carbon is released from burning garbage than burning at coal plants. And then there's the ash. Incinerators don't eliminate the need for landfills. Just like the bottom of your wood stove has a lot of ash, when you burn garbage, you get ash. The fly ash, which is from electrostatic precipitators and other pollution controls, captures some of the contaminants, and that fly ash is toxic. Virtually every incinerator company says they're going to reuse the ash into other products. They all say that. It rarely works. So that ash will go to a landfill, perhaps the Seneca Meadows landfill or another landfill. So you can have that kind of economic future in the Finger Lakes, or if you reject this proposal, you can have cleaner air, fewer asthma attacks, a lot less truck traffic, no trash trains going there, a thriving wine industry, healthy farms, a thriving tourism industry, and perhaps most importantly, a clean and healthy environment for not only our children, but our grandchildren. One thing that concerns me greatly is that this proposed incinerator would be located just 3,200 feet from this school. What are the developers of this project thinking, proposing something so close to a school? We know that the people who will make money on the project won't be sending their children to this school. But those of you who do need to think about, particularly if your kids have asthma or respiratory disease, what is the impact of the project on their health? No child should go to a school living so close to a waste incinerator. There are alternatives that you'll hear about today from Dr. Paul Connett. I want to tell you I've been involved in these issues for over 35 years, and it kind of feels like it. I thought these projects went away. You know, this is all very 1980s, but here it is back. And I also want to share with you from watching these issues for decades that the only way bad projects like this get stopped are when local citizens get involved. That's why you're all here today. You will not assume that someone else is going to take care of this. These incinerator proposals test the very fabric of our democracy at every level. The company that wants to build this incinerator is called Circular It's not like it's Dunkin' Donuts. Circular Energy. So, this company has no experience in the solid waste field, which they have promoted as a positive thing. When I go to my doctor, I want her or him to have experience in the field of medicine. Circular Energy did not ask you if you wanted them here before they advanced their proposal. I have seen companies around the country that actually are committed to engaging with the public before they make proposals. And what they do is they show up, they make presentations, they have a dialogue, they listen, and they share information before they submit a permit. But that didn't happen here. And in fact, the real puzzling thing for me is that there's an existing Romulus zoning requirement, Article 8, Section 15, that specifically prohibits this type of facility. And you'll hear from local environmental attorney Will Burns today, who will explain that in more detail. So my other question is Circular Energy planning to ignore your local prohibition on this project? Are they gearing up to challenge this in court? Are they comfortable stomping on home rule? So what I've also observed over the years is that these companies try to take the decision-making away from local communities and local residents. First, what you'll hear from them is they'll offer you something called host community benefits, which are basically just public bribes. They will make millions of dollars, and you might get a new fire truck or new Little League uniforms. Circular Energy will try to get state agencies in Albany to make the major decisions and ignore local and legitimate concerns. You can't let this happen. If you have concerns about this proposal, I urge you to do three things. One is get informed. You'll hear some great information today, but go home and do your own research. Go online, see what you can find out on your own. There's a great fact sheet that was passed out to you. Get extra copies and hand them to your friends and family. Second, donate money to help get the word out. I want to say that I am not compensated for driving 4.5 hours here this morning. Paul is not compensated. We're here because we really know this issue, and as environmental leaders want to sound the alarm that this would be a terrible mistake for this community. However, for future meetings, for printing, for postage, it's going to take money. So a basket will be circulated later. We don't want to hear any jingling coins. We only want paper in that basket. And it goes to the local organizers that are working on this, not to Paul and I. And third, show up. You've done that today. Make your voice heard. Go to the next town board meeting. Go home, talk to your neighbors about this. Get active on social media. Call your elected officials. That's something that people don't do a lot these days. Sometimes they'll sign a petition, they'll send an email, but actually call your local officials, county, state, national. As the League of Women Voters says, democracy is not a spectator sport. So it may not seem like it today, but if you get involved, personally involved in stopping this multi-million-dollar polluting project, you will have the benefit of seeing our democracy functioning up close. After you defeat this project, you want to stay together and work on waste reduction, recycling, composting programs. You want to create a community where a clean and healthy environment is prioritized, and the children going to this school won't be exposed to massive amounts of air pollution. One of my favorite sayings is, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And that's what we need here. So it's now my great honor to introduce Dr. Paul Connett to you, who will be making a presentation. Dr. Connett is a graduate of Cambridge University. He has a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth. And from 1983 to 2006, Paul taught chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, where he specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. Both Paul Connett and his wife Ellen Connett, who is sitting in the front row, are the two most expert people I have ever had the pleasure of meeting on waste issues. Their information is factually correct. You can take it to the bank. And for over the last 32 years, their research has brought Paul to 49 states, 7 provinces in Canada, and 64 other countries to give the lecture that you're going to hear this afternoon. Paul, by the way, does this all for free. I don't know how he does this. If he was working for the incinerator industry, not only would he be a millionaire, he would be a billionaire. But thankfully, he is on the side of a clean environment. Paul has several videotapes made about zero waste. In 2010, Paul gave 2 presentations on zero waste to the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development. He wrote a book, which you should all get. Forget Fire and Fury. You want the zero waste solution. It has to pop up on Amazon. Zero Waste Solution by Chelsea Green Press, which was published in 2016. And Paul actually presented the book to Pope Francis, which was very impressive. Ellen and Paul also do a lot of work opposing fluoridation in water. They are brilliant environmental leaders, and we're just so grateful to have them here today. So please welcome Dr. Paul Connett.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you, Judith. I've worked with Judith now for over 30 years, and her husband, Mark Dundley, wrote a most important booklet in 1985, which we've used a lot. The title of my talk is Incineration Does Not Make Sense in the 21st Century, and it certainly doesn't make sense in the Finger Lakes region. The outline of my talk, I should give you a little personal introduction, and then a summary of the arguments against incineration. There's a lot of them. Details of key arguments, which I will split between a global picture and a local picture. Then I should talk about the better alternatives, the 10 steps to zero waste. Now, as you've heard, I first got involved in waste management in 1985, and that was over a battle on an incinerator in St. Lawrence County. And over the last 32 years, my wife and I, particularly Ellen, who edited the newsletter called Waste Note. And it's taken me, as you've heard, to many, many places. It changed my life. Between 1985 and 1995, as Director of Work on Waste and Ellen as editor of Waste Note, we helped citizens defeat over 300 incinerator projects around the United States. And notice I said we helped. We didn't stop any incinerator. Maybe we can claim St. Lawrence County. But affecting change is like driving a nail through a piece of wood. The expert can sharpen the nail, but can't push the nail through. You need the hammer of public opinion to drive that nail home. So it's a symbiosis. I'm going to be sharpening nails, but you've got to get that hammer out and hammer those nails home in this area. They've only built 1 trash incinerator in the United States since 1997. So you're looking at something quite exceptional and quite preposterous, as you'll find out in this talk. I first heard about zero waste in San Francisco in 1999 when I was asked to go to this conference, and I shot a videotape called it Zero Waste, an Idealistic Dream or a Realistic Goal. Obviously, I concluded that it was a realistic goal because I've been working on promoting zero waste ever since. And I feel it's the most positive thing I can do, is to promote zero waste as a stepping stone to sustainability. Particularly in Italy, which I've now visited, believe it or not, 77 times, and spoken in over 290 communities in Italy. And the zero waste movement is being led both in San Francisco, in the States, and in Italy. It's quite a surprise for people in Europe to hear that Italy is leading an environmental movement, but they are with zero waste. And this all resulted in this book. There were copies outside, signed copies, The Zero Waste Solution, and the subtitle, Untrashing the Planet One Community at a Time. This planet is not going to be saved from people on top. It's going to be saved by people from the bottom upwards. It's got to be at the grassroots. If you read any book about the global economy, like David Corton's Corporations Rule the World, the last chapter is what you can do about it, and they usually say the only place that we can work on improving the situation is at the grassroots level. So I think it's absolutely marvelous that they're proposing this stupid incinerator in this region, because it's going to galvanate a lot of people. I wish they proposed more of them in beautiful areas like this to mobilize people. And remember, a threatened community is a strengthened community. If you come together, rich and poor, black and white, everybody working together, and you'll have to work together to beat this. Now, the foreword to this book was written by Jeremy Irons, an English actor you've probably heard of, and he hosted this movie, Trashed. And you can actually get to see this movie fairly soon, January the 28th, in Geneva at the Smith Opera House, 6 o'clock in the evening. Smith Opera House in Geneva. You can see this marvelous film where he examines the terrible aspects of landfilling and incineration, and particularly what we're doing to the oceans with plastic. As Judy mentioned, a very special thing happened last year in April 2016. I got to hand a copy of Zero Waste to the Pope. I would have been happy to do that with any Pope, but particularly Pope Francis. Well, I must tell you, I was waiting on this line, and I was trying to work out what was I going to say. I knew it only about 30 seconds. What was I going to say when he came along eventually, and I shoved the book in his hand, and then I said, thank you very much for what you're doing for the circular economy. I said, I still had time. This was amazing. I still had time. So I said, and they're doing great things in Italy with zero waste. And then for the several months since, I've been kicking myself, because the one thing I've been saying all over the world, I should have said then, but I didn't do it. And that is, God recycles, the devil burns. And I mean, that was the person to say it to. Okay, so the arguments against incineration. It's bad for the local, regional, and global economy. It's the most expensive way of handling waste. It is the most expensive way of making electricity. The project is not designed to solve a local waste issue. We have a solution for that, which works in many, many places. But it's designed to make you a very junior partner in the waste business. That's what they're trying to do. In fact, the waste industry does this. They have a map of the United States, and they're looking for patsy communities. Communities that they perceive as being poor, economically deprived, too preoccupied to fight them, not enough money perhaps to take them to court. They're looking for targets, not to solve their waste problem, but to make them multi-million dollars of profit from doing lazy things like landfilling and incineration. And you already experienced this in Seneca Meadows landfill. It's disgusting. They are a prime example of corporate looters. They are literally looting the planet. They're looting your children's and grandchildren's future by destroying our resources and destroying the environment at the same time. Incineration is certainly not in the community interest. If you're interested in jobs and economic development, this is the last thing you should do. In fact, building incinerators is probably the last economic development that you'll be able to do. And if it was good economic development, they want it from one end of the United States to the other. There is no competition for this facility. The only competition is keeping the damn things out of your community. Incineration creates very few permanent jobs. Oh yes, you'll get a lot of jobs building it, just as you would if you built a prison, but not permanent jobs, and not good, clean jobs. The very clean jobs will come from out of the area. Incineration is a threat to agriculture, tourism, and desirable industries, clean industries. Incineration is a threat to property values. You can prove this. Take a picture of a house with and without an incinerator. Two pictures. One picture will be a house. Another picture will be the same house with the stack of the incinerator visible in the photograph. Ask any real estate agent what difference that would make to the property values, and you'll get a shock. And this has been studied scientifically. University of Northeastern University showed that the property values increased the further the house was from the incinerator. Incineration is a threat to health and the intellectual development of your children. Incineration produces toxic air emissions. It produces a toxic ash. It doesn't get rid of landfills. Incineration is a waste of energy. That may sound strange. Energy? It's a waste of energy. I'll explain that more later. Incineration is a wasted opportunity to fight global warming. Incineration does not move us towards a sustainable society, the circular economy. And there are far better alternative ways of handling our discarded materials. Notice I don't call them waste, discarded materials, which are better for the local economy, better for, pose less threat to health, create far more jobs, are compatible with tourism and agriculture, and move us towards a sustainable future. So now I'll look at those arguments again, not all of them, but in terms of the planet as a whole, and then locally. So as a planet as a whole, the key issue is sustainability. We would need 5 planets if everybody consumed as much as the average American. 5 planets. And meanwhile, India and China, these huge populations, are copying our consumption patterns. Something clearly has to change. And in my view, the best place to start this change is with the way we handle our waste. We have to move from a throwaway society to a sustainable society. That is the absolutely greatest imperative that we have once we've found a way to end war. This is it. This is what your children will be, and grandchildren will be preoccupied with, that difficult task. Another way of putting this is we have to move from a linear economy to a circular economy. And this is a linear economy, starts with the extraction of raw materials, transporting them around the world, manufacturing products, then consuming those products, and then finally production of waste. And enormous global impacts that we have here. We use an enormous amount of energy in extraction, enormous amount of energy in transport, enormous energy in manufacture of products. And to do all this, we rip down rainforests, we extinguish species, we are producing 70 times more waste that you don't see, 70 times more waste in extraction and manufacture than you see at your landfill, at your garbage can. Air pollution, of course, water pollution, plastic pollution of the oceans, a disgusting thing that we are doing, and it's come about unthinking. I mean, no evil intent in using all these stupid plastic objects. No evil intent at all, but the end result is absolutely devastating. And some of the major environmental organizations are trying to find ways that we can tackle this problem of plastics in the oceans. Reduction in availability of clean water, possibly the ultimate limit to growth on our planet. the exhaustion of fossil fuels and mineral resources, and finally, the production of carbon dioxide. And that, of course, is resulting in global warming. You can tell when someone is sick, you put a thermometer in their mouth. We can tell when the planet is sick, you put a thermometer in the mouth, and that's called global warming. So how do the different ways of handling waste impact this linear economy? So let's start with landfilling. When you bury stuff in a hole in the ground, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning and start this linear economy all over again. So there's no mitigation. Landfilling is not a sustainable solution. What if you burn it? But if you burn the waste, it's the same thing. You've got to go all the way back again, extract those raw materials, transport them around the world, manufacture the new product. So incineration is absolutely not a sustainable solution. So why should we spend billions of dollars building incinerators which destroy resources and don't take us an inch closer towards sustainability? So don't fall for this guilty trip. They'll try to say, oh, you're NIMBY. You only don't want this incinerator because we're building it in your town. Absolutely. Everybody should be a NIMBY when it comes to these things. If you want to castigate anybody with the word NIMBY, use it for those communities that don't give a damn because it's not in their community. That's who you should castigate. We should all care about what happens to other people. Well, you've got a model of this kind of machine. It's in Syracuse, in DeWitt, near just outside Syracuse. Your incinerator is going to be about 6 times larger than that incinerator there. And I remember standing and giving a press conference outside that incinerator about 20-odd years ago and saying, you know, you've got the cathedral of consumption at one end of town, and you've got the high-tech toilet at the other end of town. So we buy our objects here, and in a relatively short time, those objects are moved across town, and they're burnt in the incinerator. So locally, incinerators produce a little energy, but globally, they're a huge waste of energy. Let me explain why. Because they waste the opportunity to recover the embedded energy that we've used in extraction, manufacture, and transport. So we put a lot of energy into these materials, into transporting, into manufacture. None of that energy comes back to you when you burn those materials. Next time round, in the next cycle, you can get that energy back, or you can save energy, because if you recycle, you don't have to go back to extraction. And if you reuse, you don't have to go back to either extraction or manufacture. And to give you the numbers here, these are the common materials which you're burning in incinerators. The green figures are how much energy you save if you recycle or reuse those materials. The yellow is how much you get if you burn the material to produce electricity. And the end column in white is the ratio, how much more energy you save by recycling, etc., than you get from incineration. Look at PET, PET plastic. This is the plastic of water bottles, plastic water bottles. 26 times more energy is saved by recycling those plastic bottles than burning them. And that's devastating. In other words, governments that subsidize incineration, it's an environmental crime. It's an environmental crime. If you're going to subsidize anything, you should be subsidizing recycling, reuse, and composting. And for exactly the same reasons, incinerators are a huge wasted opportunity to fight global warming. You know, all this energy that you're using for extraction and transport and manufacture, that's all producing carbon dioxide, which is all producing global warming. And if you just burn your materials, you don't save any of that energy, as I've just said, and you don't reduce your carbon dioxide production. Now, compare this with recycling. If you recycle, you cut out all the impacts of extraction. If you reuse, you cut out all the impacts of manufacture. And if you compost, similar arguments, you reduce the amount of synthetic fertilizers that you're making. But there's so much more with composting, so much more. You are putting nutrients back into the soil. You are holding on to water more, which is particularly important in hot climates. And you are sequestering carbon, And you're not just sequestering carbon, I'll go into that in a moment, but you're also stimulating plant growth. And that too acts as a store of carbon dioxide. So here is compost. And you see bits of twigs in there, bits of wood, cellulose. That is carbon. That's trapped carbon. If you burn that, those bits of cellulose instantly become carbon dioxide and contribute to global warming. If you compost, they're held in the soil for many months or many years. But if you use that soil to produce trees or plants, you store the carbon dioxide in, obviously, the plant and in the roots. Oh, yes, so the roots of the plant. And they've had some extraordinary experiments being done in Marin County, California, just north of San Francisco. They found that just spreading about an inch of compost on grazing land, a huge amount of carbon is being stored in those roots. A huge amount of carbon. I notice the petition is going around. Please sign the petition. If you've just signed it already, you don't have to sign it again, but if you haven't signed it, your name is precious. So here you see these roots, but in the grazing land, what happens is the compost opens up the soil, allows the roots to go deeper and deeper and deeper, storing more and more carbon dioxide. And the scientists have been staggered by how simple this is. These are cover crops from a vineyard in north of San Francisco, where the cover crops are between the vines. And so the compost is being used to grow the vines and also to grow the cover crops. And the cover crops are storing a huge amount of carbon dioxide. So as far as sustainability is concerned, every ton we bury or burn takes us in the opposite direction to sustainability. But every ton that we compost, every ton that we reuse, every ton that we recycle, every ton that we avoid because it's not necessary, takes us in the right direction. Okay, let's move now to the local picture. This incinerator will be not just the largest in New York State, it probably will be the largest in the whole of the United States. I mean, I know that the Detroit incinerator, which is on the verge of being closed down, was about 3,000 tons. But this is pretty big. And as Judith has already mentioned, 240 trucks will come along routes 96, 96A, Route 414, Brumker Road, routes 5 and 20, until the train delivery is fully operational. In that time, those trucks are going to be competing with local traffic, including school buses and so on. These roads are not equipped to look after so many trucks. When the rail haul operations go into effect, they will deliver something like 2,000 tons of waste per day. Monday through Saturday, trucks and trains running through all the time, all the night. And the incinerator will be running 24 hours a day. And one of the things you may not know is that in an incinerator, you have trucks going forwards and backwards, picking up different things, and you'll get the backing stuff, wow, 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 very noisy, very noisy. So rail haul through your beautiful area, trucks cluttering the roads, competing with these school buses. You will also be generating at least 800 tons of toxic ash per day. You will be producing more ash here than the Syracuse incinerator burns in a day. More ash produced here than the Syracuse incinerator. And that ash will go to landfills. This is a Covanta landfill in Haverhill, Massachusetts. That is combined ash from municipal waste incinerators. The incinerator will withdraw 445,000 gallons per day of water from your beautiful Seneca Lake, and will be discharging the dirty water back into Reeder Creek, which is already designated by the EPA as an impaired water body. And look at your beautiful vineyards. Right there, you're just a couple of miles from these vineyards. We had lunch there, Ellen and I and Judith. Now I look at this map. Putting an incinerator here is an environmental and economic stupidity of the enormous thing. You've got, I was looking, excuse me, before I do that. This map is like walking down memory lane for me. Okay, I started in the United States here in 1966. I was a graduate student at Cornell University. I stayed there about a year and a half, and then I got involved with the Vietnam peace movement. And I didn't get my PhD till 17 years later in Dartmouth. Canandaigua, one of the earliest battles outside our own St. Lawrence County was in Canandaigua. Geneva, I remember debating the vice president of Ogden Martin in Geneva. Ogden Martin is now Covanta, which is widely tipped to be the company that's going to build here. I spoke in Seneca Falls. I visited Linda Oakes down here she was from Waterloo, still is. I've been to, was into Auburn fighting fluoridation, all over this area. Cortland, you go on. Story of my life. You know, there's a poem by Kafafi, a Greek poet, and the first line is, Ithaca gave you that splendid journey. And I think, yes, Ithaca gave me that splendid journey. I came here as a staid Englishman interested in academia. I ended up being an activist, and it's taken me all over the world. So locating this huge incinerator between Lake Seneca and Cayuga is economic and environmental madness. Absolute madness. And when you see an activity which is so irrational as this, so irrational, like shooting yourself in the foot, something else is operating. And that brings me to two laws. The bad law, this is Connett's 2 laws of pollution. The first law is a bad law. The level of pollution increases directly as the level of corruption. I had nothing personal. I don't know who's being paid off here. I don't know. But I bet you someone's being paid off. And we don't speak lightly about this. Back in the 1980s, a gentleman by the name of Philip Armetta, who ran the Dainty Trash Service in Bristol, Connecticut, received $3 million to expedite getting the incinerator approved in Bristol, Connecticut. Imagine what one individual can do amongst local politicians when they've got $3 million to spread around. And that was not denied by the company, which was Ogden Martin, before Covanta. Was not denied by the company. In fact, they were rather proud. They thought this was a pretty efficient way of using money to get this incinerator approved. Well, that's depressing. The good law says the level of pollution decreases directly as the level of public participation. And that's why you're here today. So incineration is not good for tourism. Remember, where the incinerator is going to be placed, there, with all those wonderful wineries up and down Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake, and even the Cayuga Lake, I don't know how you pronounce that, lots of wineries. And in a precious industry, The wine and tourism industry brings in $4.8 billion to New York State annually and supports over 59,000 jobs. This incinerator will employ about 50 to 100 people. Look at what you're threatening. It's absolutely bizarre. And Seneca Lake contains 4.2 trillion gallons of fresh water. It's the largest freshwater body solely within New York State borders. It serves as a drinking water source for 100,000 people and is currently the saltiest of all the Finger Lakes. There's that beautiful lake. And between that lake and Lake Cayuga, which is also fairly precious, you're going to put this incinerator, which puts out many highly toxic and persistent substances into the air. And those persistent and toxic, in case of toxic metals, permanent toxic metals, lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and so on, and new compounds produced in the burning process called dioxins and furans. Now, what you've got to remember is that these two lakes represent huge catchment areas for these pollutants. Huge! You could not possibly produce a site for an incinerator in which you can guarantee that more of the pollutants are not caught by the food chains between the lakes and the agriculture. Let's have a look at this. So there's a circle I've drawn. Don't ask me what the radius is, I have no idea. But just for the moment, imagine you had a way of gauging the areas of this water here and here, and estimate what fraction of that water will capture the pollutants. It's quite a sizable fraction. And now also remember that between these lakes and around these lakes, you've got a huge catchment area for agriculture. There's practically not a place that dioxin or mercury that falls is not captured either by fish or by grazing animals. I'll get to the numbers in a moment. Let's take mercury. Mercury, when it gets into the sediments of lakes, is converted into methyl mercury. The methyl mercury is fat soluble and then bioconcentrates up the food chain. Now, Janet Raloff, writing in Science News in '91, stated that as little as 1/3 of a gram of mercury, there's 454 grams in a pound. As little as 1/3 of a gram of mercury could contaminate a 25-acre lake to the point that the largest fish would be unfit to eat by pregnant women. 1/3 of a gram. There's a reference. Now, what about this incinerator in Onondaga County? In 1999, the Syracuse incinerator put out 107 pounds of mercury. Remember, yours is 5 or 6 times larger than this incinerator. In 2009, they brought that down to about 2 pounds. But that's still 1,000 grams of mercury. And as I said, the Romulus incinerator will be about 5 times bigger than this one. Now, they've done some interesting work in Syracuse. A professor from Syracuse University found that fish in the little glacier lake in Clark Reservation State Park are swimming around with elevated levels of mercury in this body of water. And 6 out of 7 pickerel and 2 out of 6 of walleye had mercury concentrations above the EPA guidelines for consumption. The glacier, now this is the interesting part, the glacier lake is a plunge pool, has little or no watershed. This is direct deposition from the air into the lake. And so he doesn't, being a professor, he's a little timid to be too definitive. He says there's no proof that mercury in the fish came from the incinerator. That would require air sampling. But Driscoll said the facility is a likely source as it is the closest discharger of mercury. And he said, unlike most northeastern lakes, the sediment is building up with mercury. So this is something that you have to take very seriously. I was listening carefully to the list of groups that are supporting you. You need to add to that list fishermen, anglers. Anybody that fishes in that lake should be concerned. You should also list hunters. Hunters should be very concerned, because those animals, the deer and other animals that you eat out there, they too will be concentrating the mercury and the dioxins. So which brings us to dioxins. Dioxins also bioconcentrate up the aquatic food chain. So probably the highest doses of dioxin will be in the fish in the lakes, closely followed by milk and beef and so on. So incineration is not good for agriculture. So let's say this again because it's important. So you've got two huge catchment areas with these lakes, and a third one over here. But in between here and around here, you've got agriculture. And when you see those cornfields, a lot of that corn is going to be fed to animals. So that corn is capturing, even if they're in CAFOs or whatever, that corn is going to go into silage or the whole corn plant and be fed to animals. Again, huge catchment areas. So let me talk now about the dioxins and furans. The major, which is my specialty, by the way, since 1986 was our first paper. The major problem with dioxins and furans is that they are highly persistent and fat-soluble and accumulate in the fat of grazing animals, and as I mentioned, in fish too. These are the best scavengers of dioxin that you can think of. Maybe sheep may be better, maybe deer may be better than that, but these are one hell of a vacuum cleaner as far as dioxins are concerned. So my first scientific paper, after getting involved with this issue in '85, was to show that 1 liter of cow's milk would give you the equivalent of breathing the air next to the cow for 8 months. 8 months of breathing is packaged into 1 liter of cow's milk. And a German study showed that in 1 day, a grazing cow puts her into its body the equivalent, 1 day, 14 years of breathing. So, I mean, this is important because many of you, like me at the beginning, you look at an incinerator, you see this tall stack, which you'll see from miles around, 260 feet up there, and you say, oh, by the time that stuff comes down to me, it'll be okay for me to breathe. But what you've got to remember is that whilst the stack dilutes and distributes, grazing animals reconcentrate, and fish reconcentrate these pollutants onto your breakfast table. Dioxins steadily accumulate in the human body. Now, here's something to worry men. We can't get rid of it. The dioxin in our body fat just steadily accumulates over a lifetime. But women can get rid of the dioxin. It's called having a baby. So the woman is building up the dioxin in her fat for 20 years, 25 years. She has her first baby, and the dioxins migrate from her body fat to the fetus. For 9 months, that fetus is getting the highest doses of any human being or pre-human being than any other age in our population. And so the highest doses are going to the fetus, and then when the woman breastfeeds, which she should do, but this is the downside, she's giving her baby dioxins. And dioxins act like fat-soluble hormones, and the development of the fetus and the development of the infant is controlled by hormones. Sex hormones, thyroid hormones, these control development. And so you're interfering with the development of the fetus. And the dioxin disrupts male and female sex hormones, thyroid hormones, etc. And Linda Birnbaum, who's now head of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, wrote an extremely important article on the developmental effects of dioxins. And at about the same time, Theo Coburn, who passed away, wrote this magnificent book, Our Stolen Future, which many people was the second silent spring. It dealt with how man-made chemicals interfere with fertility, intelligence, and survival. Brilliant book. But the bottom line, and this is what we were saying in the 1990s as we were opposing incinerators all over the country, we must get dioxin out of our babies. And run the clock forward to 2003, and the Institute of Medicine put out this most important study in which they said fetuses and breastfeeding infants may be at particular risk from exposure to dioxin-like compounds due to their potential to cause adverse neurodevelopmental, neurobehavioral, and immune system effects in developing systems. And what did they advise? They said the committee recommends that the government place a high public health priority on reducing dioxin-like compound intakes by girls and young women in the years well before pregnancy. Don't wait till you're pregnant to start changing your diet. Do it from very early on by substituting low-fat or skim milk for whole milk and foods lower in animal fat. I mean, that didn't get much coverage. It was covered in the New York Times, but didn't get much coverage. And yet, what is it saying? We have threatened half of the human population by our activities producing incinerators. Half the population should change dramatically their diet. I say no, we don't dramatically change the diet. We should dramatically change how we handle waste. Stop building incinerators. And we did. And we did. For 20 years, we did. Now you've got the bloody thing coming back again. We must get dioxin out of our food, out of our fish, out of our meat, out of our milk. And you're going to go in the opposite direction. There we go again. The catchment areas. Again, let me say this. You could not have chosen a place in the United States which was destined to put more dioxin into the food chains than this. And not just agricultural animals, wild animals, the white deer. These too will be accumulating dioxin in their body fat. And we need hunters. We need hunters in your groups. Hunters should be concerned about what animals they're eating. They're eating these animals to save money. But if they're going to be poisoned with dioxin, that's not a good deal, or heavy metals. Don't eat the livers, for God's sake, because that's where the toxic metals will be. Now, those are, if you like, indirect effects. You impact the food chains, and then you impact the human diet. But what about where they are building this thing? At the depot here, the old Seneca Falls depot, just across, what did Julius said, 3,000 feet? Was it 3,000 feet? There's this central school. Another aspect of madness here. There's a map showing where the school rings out. These rings are an increasing diameter of 1 mile. So the first ring is less than a mile, the next ring is 2 miles, and so on. And you've got another school down there which is only about 5 miles away. I was intrigued by the slogan of your Romulus Central School, children first, learning always at the school with big ideas. Yes, 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 we need that education of our brightest minds. But guess what? Some of the pollutants from this incinerator are neurotoxic, are brain damaging. And as Judith has mentioned, the acid gases will contribute to respiratory problems. If kids have got asthma, they're going to make it worse with this incinerator, no question about it, and other respiratory problems. But the real concern here is toxic metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, all neurotoxic, all damaging our children's brains. Our children's brains are under chemical attack in this country, under chemical attack. The major problem with I said, is their brain damaging. Now, let's be fair. While modern incinerators have reduced toxic metal and dioxin emissions with their air pollution control devices, there's no real accountability here. The most toxic emissions are not monitored on a continuous basis. They would talk about continuous environmental monitoring, but that will be only for pollutants like nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides, and so on. There's no continuous monitoring of most of the toxic metals and the dioxins. What they rely upon are what we call spot tests. With the company given a few weeks' notice, a lab will come in, collect the emissions in a probe. You put a probe halfway up the stack, you collect emissions for 6 hours, you do that 3 times in a 24-hour period, and you take an average, and then they use this average to predict the annual emissions. Now, the company's given, say, a month's notice, so they can prepare what waste they're going to put through, and they have done that. That's documented. And if anything goes wrong with the incinerator whilst they're doing that test, if you get upset conditions, they stop the test. So what you've got is 18 hours, or 36, or 54, depending on whether you do it 1, 2, or 3 times a year, of ideal data. And that's being used to extrapolate to 365 days a year, 8,000 hours of operation. And we've had scientists in Belgium that have compared the dioxin concentrations that they get from 6-hour tests with the results from 2-week tests. And it's 30 to 50 times higher than the 6-hour tests in these longer tests. And those now are commercially available, the AMISA system. But there's no inclination from Covanta to use these in America, these tests. So it's a confidence trick. You're made to feel that the emissions are not very high, but the reality is different. So here's the overview of this. To protect the public from toxic emissions, you need strong regulations, you need adequate monitoring, and you need tough enforcement. Well, Judith has been in enforcement agencies, and she'll probably share with you privately how tough they are. I think they're tough. Their weapon is a feather duster. And as far as adequate monitoring, I've told you that's a joke with these spot tests. But there's something worse. Most of the toxic metals and dioxins come out on the surface of very tiny particles, which are called nanoparticles, less than 1 micron. And there are no regulations for nanoparticles, none. There's no monitoring of nanoparticles. So your regulations are over here for incinerators, either 10 microns, and that might be going down to 2.5 microns. But the things that we are concerned about here are these nanoparticles, these very tiny particles. And the problem here is that they're not efficiently captured in the most modern particulate control devices because they're so tiny. And they travel long distances. And they remain suspended for long periods of time. They don't settle under gravity. They settle under a Brownian motion, which I won't go into. It's slow. And they penetrate deep into the lungs. But it's even worse than that. Nanoparticles are so tiny, there is no protection from the membrane. They squeeze straight through the membrane. They go between the proteins and the lipids, and they go straight from the air into your bloodstream. And once they're in the bloodstream, they're distributed throughout the body, and they can enter every tissue in the body, including the brain. This is a particle in brain tissue which contains lead, barium, chromium, iron, and silicon. And believe me, you don't want those elements in your brain or your children's brain at that school. Now, there's a brilliant paper by a brilliant guy called Vivian Howard, who I've known for years. I can make this available to the organizers on just what the threat is to health. He's written a book on ultrafine particles. And I have seen no scientific response to this brilliant 30-page summary by Vivian Howard from either the incinerator industry or government agencies. As I said before, incineration does not get rid of landfills. You still need landfills to handle the ash. Over half the money spent on building an incinerator today goes into the cost of air pollution control. In other words, when you build an incinerator, half your money is going into this part here, the air pollution control equipment, the scrubbers, the filters, the denox equipment, etc. And the stuff that you capture there is called fly ash. And the ash that's left on the grates is called bottom ash. The bottom ash is about 90% of your product, and fly ash is about 10%. These are very rough figures. The fly ash is extremely toxic. The bottom ash is toxic, but not as extremely toxic as the fly ash. So is it toxic? Common sense tells you the better the incinerator gets, the more toxic the ash is going to be, particularly the fly ash. What do most countries think of the ash? In Germany and Switzerland, the fly ash is put into nylon bags and placed in salt mines. In Japan, many of the incinerators not only vitrify the fly ash, but also vitrify, make into a glass, the bottom ash. In Denmark, they have a wonderful solution in Denmark. They send all their ash to Norway. And in the United States, we've gone one step better. We've come up with tests now which show that the ash is non-toxic. It's called transmutation of the elements. This is one cartoonist who we knew when we were fighting an incinerator in the Scranton area. Another load of safe incinerator ash, he said. Now, this is a scam. The United States has an ash scam. And this is it. We documented, or Ellen documented, the great incinerator ash scam in waste knots 315 to 318 in March of 1995. And you can find this on the internet. You can find it on our webpage. And our webpage, AmericanHealthStudies.org. There's a lot I could say about this. I'm going to limit it to a few slides. In the 1980s, many ash samples were failing the leachate test at the time, the so-called EP tox test, extraction procedure toxic test, and should have been sent to hazardous waste landfills. This is great work done by the Environmental Defense Fund in the 1980s. They showed that the fly ash fails the EP tox test 100% of the time, and the bottom ash fails about a third of the time, and the combined ash failed 47% of the time. And this is the incinerator industry's response. You're going to love this. This is the guy I debated in Geneva, New York. He says, as far as the ash failing the test, it means finito, morte, the end of the resource recovery. That was their name for incineration. They never want to use the word incinerator. The resource recovery industry, if ash is treated as hazardous waste, there is simply no room for 4 million additional tons annually of ash waste. It would overwhelm all existing hazardous waste landfills. And they use this legal argument. The incinerator industry argued that as trash was exempt from leachate testing, then so should ash be exempt. You know, ash is only processed trash, so why should you treat it? Why should you subject it to a separate test? Clearly they have no knowledge of chemistry whatsoever to come out with a stupid idea like that. But it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And then in 1994, the Supreme Court ruled that ash must be tested, and if it fails the extraction procedure test, it should go to a hazardous waste landfill. Gosh, we thought we'd won. We thought we killed the industry. And then the Supreme Court left it to the EPA to determine how the toxic leachate test was administered. And the EPA gave the house away, or at least your houses away, or the population of the United States away, with two steps. First of all, the EPA allowed the incinerators to mix the bottom ash, which was produced over here, with the fly ash, which is produced over here, and mix them together before you tested them. That's a dilution of 10 to 1. Then the second thing they did is they changed the test from the EP tox test to the TCLP test. And if you wanted to, I could go into the chemistry of why that enabled them then to find that all combined ash is now passing the toxic leachate tests and therefore allows the ash to go to regular landfills or to combined ash landfills, either regular landfills or monofills. So you can anticipate that you will have something like this in your area in addition to the incinerator. Now, even though they got around the test, there are many other questions. How much ash are workers exposed to in this incinerator? Remember, the dirty jobs are going to go to people living in this area. The good jobs are going to go from outside the area. How are the workers monitored for toxic metal and dioxin exposure? How long are the workers monitored for this toxic metals? What happens to them when they leave the industry? Is somebody looking for after them? No, no, no. How much lead ends up in the surface runoff water? The ash, when produced, is highly alkaline. As soon as water, rain, or melting snow hits the ash on the cover, the lead will leach out and go into your runoff in your local area. How much of the fine ash particles are carried by the wind to nearby homes? Brush winds across. I'm sure this area is flat and windy. During movement at the landfill, how much of the mercury that you've captured re-evaporates in high temperatures during the summer? So lots of questions, lots of questions. But before we go too far in those questions, in my view, the modern incinerator is attempting to perfect a bad idea. It's bad anyway. It's a bad idea. Our task in the 21st century is not to find better ways to destroy discarded materials, but to stop making packaging and products that have to be destroyed. So that brings us to the last topic, the better alternatives to incineration and mega landfills. In my view, the waste problem will not be solved with better technology, but better organization, better education, and better industrial design. And these are the key principles of the zero waste strategy. Now I will take you into a shortened version of the 10 steps to zero waste. My book is out there that will give you the full details, and the organizers here will have the full presentation. But I've got, what is the time? How much time have I got?
It's 4:20. So you have 10 minutes.
How long?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, that's good. That's 10 minutes. 10 steps, 1 minute a step. So there are all the 10 steps if you're impatient. Source separation, door-to-door collection, composting, recycling, reuse, repair, and research, community centers, economic incentives, waste reduction initiatives, residual separation and research center, better industrial design, and an interim landfill, a smaller landfill, which should get smaller and smaller. Changing the attitude to landfilling. For 100 years, we've left landfilling to engineers. Willy-nilly of what you put into a landfill, they came up with liners, etc., to control what goes out. But all landfills leak, according to the EPA. They all leak, so you're not hiding to nothing. So if you can't control what comes out of a landfill, you have to control what goes into the landfill. And that is step 8 down there, residual separation. So briskly, through a few more steps, step 1 is the most important. It is source separation. These 10 things make waste. These 10 things. You make waste by mixing, and you save resources by separation. So the first thing your community has to do, and you're probably doing it, is source separation. The second step is door-to-door collection. This is what it looks like in San Francisco, 3 containers, 1 for the recyclables, 1 for the compostables, and 1 for the residuals. And in Italy, more elegant systems. The same trucks pick up different materials on different days. So in this town of Capanari near Lucca in Tuscany, on Mondays they pick up the organics. On Tuesday the multi-materials, the mixed recyclables. On Wednesdays the paper. On Thursdays the residual fraction, and so on. You can tell which day of the week it is by the containers at the side of the road. 1 container a day. Step 3, the most important, composting. More important than recycling. Here's the hierarchy with organic waste. Dispose of wasted organics. The first thing you want to do is to feed people. And there are many organizations which are getting food from restaurants and supermarkets before the due date to poor people. That's great. Feed animals. You know, we need to organize our community. If you've got a dog or a cat, that dog and cat, instead of eating this junk in tins, could be eating some of the food waste that you're producing. And I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you came along with a few bones, etc. Feed the soil. I know you've got a lot of organic farming in the area, and you've got to protect that. We need healthy soil to produce healthy food, to produce healthy people. And the hierarchy, first of all, do it in your backyard. That's the most important contribution that any individual family could do, is to compost in your backyard. Or if you like, vermiculture, use worm bins. Then you've got community composting. In Zurich, Switzerland, 1,000 community compost plots. Anything from 3 households to 100 households. They are looking after 50% of all the organic material, food waste produced in Zurich. On farms, you've got a lot of farms in the area. We need to persuade those farmers to help us to co-compost the municipal organics with their farm waste and produce a very high quality compost. And finally, a centralized facility. San Francisco has a centralized composting facility. And they've introduced a law where it's 25% cheaper for hotels and restaurants to put out clean organics. And yes, they send municipal workers to the restaurants and hotels to show them exactly what they want and how to do it. The composting facility is fairly low tech. It's located about 70 miles north of San Francisco. It's surrounded by farmland. And the farmers are using the compost to grow fruit and vegetables which go back to San Francisco. And also 200 vineyards are using the compost to grow their grapes. And you obviously got a market for that. But it's got to be clean. We've got to make sure that people separate the clean stuff out. That's why you need door-to-door collection. Step 4 is recycling. I think you all know about that, so I'm not going to say much about that. Reuse, repair, and research centers. This is my favorite topic. I love reuse centers. Reusable objects are only 2% of the total waste stream, discard stream, but they're worth well over a third of the waste stream's value. Over a third of the value. And these reuse centers, this is the prototype, Urban Ore in Berkeley, California. It's been running for 30 years, grossing $3 million per year, and 37 full-time, well-paid jobs. This one low-tech facility is employing more workers than you're probably going to get at the incinerator. And it's like a shopping mall for second-hand goods. This jacket came from Thrifty Shopper in Ithaca. This belt, that was $6. This belt was $3. And I think these trousers were actually new, but I've got the... Anyway, that's what we need to do. You know, you're talking about a circular economy. We've got one. It's called reuse and reuse stores. And the very valuable item that goes to these things are building materials. We need to get our builders using going around with the fitments and so on. Burlington, Vermont, wonderful reuse operation. Laid out like a department store with working televisions, beautifully furniture and so on. And they're linked up. They not only sell the objects, but they are training people, unemployed people off the street to repair large appliances, small appliances, electrical goods, even computers. And then after 9 months, they help them to get a job. And they're linked to a deconstruction company which takes down old buildings, churches, barns, what have you. The material is recovered, and a lot of it is being used to make lovely furniture. Value added. Job for 5 minutes. Okay. Some examples on videotape. You can get them from our website, AmericanHealthStudies.org. They are good for poverty relief, job creation, job training, linked to deconstruction, linked to value-added enterprises, community development. To fight overconsumption, we need to recreate the village in the big anonymous city. And we can make reuse and recycling fun. They've done this in Gothenburg, Sweden. They don't have much fun in Sweden, it's too dark. But they have got this wonderful reuse park in Gothenburg. When you go in, there's a band playing. And when you go around, there are clowns entertaining the children. And when you go to the toilet, it's an art gallery. And oh, this is my favorite. This dog is the famous Swedish separating dog. You can separate multi-materials into 6 different categories. Now, if a dog can do that in Sweden, I think we can get our citizens to separate into 3. Now, steps 6 through 9 attempt to minimize the residual fraction. Step 6 is a very powerful one. It's the pay-as-you-throw system. The compostables are free, no surcharge. Recyclables, free, no surcharge. But the residuals, the more you make, the more you pay. Simple to administer. You give everybody the chance when you lay out the system. Do you want a small container for your residuals, medium size, or a big one? But you pay more for the big one than you do for the medium size. And in Italy, they have a system where you've got a microchip in the residual bag. You only pay when you put the container out. So you can save it up for a month and save money. Step 7, other waste reduction initiatives. Don't have time to go into that. How close are we getting to zero waste through steps 1 through 7? In San Francisco, population 850,000, very little space, 50% waste diverted, 2000. By 2011, they were up to 80%, and their goal for 2020 is very close, and we're very close to 2020. Flanders, the Flemish-speaking part of Belgium, population 6 million people, 73% diversion. When we say diversion, that's all the things that you do to keep the waste out of the landfill, or heaven help us, the incinerator. In Italy, we have over 1,000 communities getting over 70%, around 300 over 80%, some even over 90%, and they're reaching these diversions very quickly. But what about going beyond 80%? Most communities would be pretty happy with 80% diversion today. Well, the purists, though, said, you're talking about zero waste. How do you get to zero waste? Well, to get closer to zero waste, we need industrial support. So that's step 8. It's in 2 parts. You have a residual separation facility, and they've been built in Nova Scotia. They're built in front of the landfill. There it is. There's the landfill. That's a close-up. The residuals come in, the bags are open, more recyclables are pulled out, more toxics are pulled out, and the dirty organic fraction is not touched, but it's stabilized in a organic conversion, biological composting. But not to use this stuff, but to stabilize it above ground before it damages the environment underground. And into that, we need to introduce a zero waste research center, where we study the non-recyclable fraction, what I call bad industrial design. And this should be manned by students, professors from local universities and technical colleges. This is our laboratory for sustainability. Study our mistakes. And the message to industry is quite simple. If we can't reuse it, if we can't recycle it, or can't compost it, then industry shouldn't be making it. We need better industrial design for the 21st century. So here's a nice overview of zero waste. If you want it in one slide, zero waste is a combination of community responsibility and industrial responsibility. The community responsibility, the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, don't forget compost. Industrial responsibility, redesign. And so that's step 9 is industrial responsibility, better industrial design. Step 10 is an interim landfill for biologically stabilized dirty organic fraction. There's the whole thing again. What I like about this, it begins with everybody. Everybody has these 10 things. We're involving the whole population in this movement to sustainability. But by the time we get down to steps 8 and 9 and possibly step 5, we are using our brightest minds in society. We're using our professors. We're using our students, our university students. We're using our industrial designers. And we need those bright minds to link the successes that we can get in zero waste with other aspects of sustainability, sustainable agriculture, sustainable architecture, and so on and so on and so on. So this gives us an opportunity. I've got to wind down. So the last things. If you hang on a few minutes, I'll give you a song. But maybe I'll leave the song to after the questions and answers. Okay. Zero waste is better for the economy, more jobs. It's better for our health, less toxics. It's better for our universities, more meaning, more relevance. It's better for the planet. It's more sustainable. And it's better for our children because it gives them more hope for the future. Thank you very much.
Dr. Paul Connett, ladies and gentlemen, and his lovely wife, Ellen, came up here on their own dime. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to introduce Will O'Lean. Will is the Secretary of the Finger Lakes Wine Business Coalition, and he's also the vintner at Oneida and Eagle Crest Vineyards over on Hemlock Lake. So Will's a long way from home as well. And if the panel could make their way to the stage while Will's speaking, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Dr. Connett. It's a tough act to follow. How about another round of applause for Dr. Connett? I'll just take a minute of your time. As Joseph said, I'm one of the members of the Finger Lakes Wine Business Coalition. That's a business coalition of over 130 organizations, small businesses, entrepreneurs, vineyards, wineries, artists, creatives, who saw the need to protect the Finger Lakes and our Finger Lakes way of life as our agritourism became an economic engine that's producing hope for a lot of residents in the Finger Lakes to start their own business and to take advantage of the 4 or 5 million people that come from other areas of the country every year to vacation here in the beautiful Finger Lakes to, for a day or a week, participate in our daily life, our way of life, which is increasingly becoming more of a sustainable way toward economic self-sufficiency. The Wine Business Coalition was started a few years ago to fight the gas storage on Seneca Lake, and for those of you who are aware of that fight, we've largely won. Thanks to the help of Gas Free Seneca and all the people that volunteered over the last 7 years to keep the Texas Gas Storage Company from making this a gas hub for the Northeast. All we have left is propane, and that's in the hands of the DEC, and we're anticipating a favorable decision anytime. So those of you that know Gas Free Seneca and know its work over the last 7 years, it's been a tremendous organization. You may have donated to that cause. That was money well invested because it worked. We organized and it worked. The Seneca Lake Guardian is sort of a spin-off of that effort, and it's associated with the Waterkeeper Alliance that Robert Kennedy started. So Yvonne and Joseph and Marianne are now the new board members of this new organization. And today, I want to ask each of you to invest once again. We're going to send around a bucket to collect some of your donations. If you don't have money to invest, your time and your talent are just as valuable. There are volunteer cards out in front. If you want to be part of this fight, this is not going to be a simple fight. As we continue to understand this project better and apply local pressure, it's changing and moving, and the entity behind this bad idea is going to use every legal resource they can to defeat the will of the local people, and we're going to need resources. We were fortunate in the gas fight to have Earth Justice and the National Resource Defense Council that pro bono represented the people of the Finger Lakes in legal battles. We don't know if we will have them again. They're very busy fighting battles all over the world. So anything as simple as buying a button for $1, that's the cost of the button, buying a sign for $5 and putting it out wherever you happen to live or work. But beyond that, I'd ask each of you to make a donation. So I can't do something without doing it myself. So I'm going to take a few of my Vineyard dollars here, and we'll put a little money in the till.
Okay, thanks, Will.
Please, as it passes around, please make a financial contribution. If you want to make a check out, it's Seneca Lake, or Seneca Guardian, right?
Seneca Lake Garden.
Seneca Lake Guardian. That is a 501c3, New York State not-for-profit. And Joseph and Yvonne and Marianne are great stewards for our region. They do this volunteer like the rest of us. Please attend these board meetings going forward. We don't know where this decision is going to lie, whether it's going to be in Albany or whether it's going to be the local people. But over the last 7 years, we found that our fight with gas storage at every level, it does work. It does work. So there is hope. This is not futile. If you feel hopeless and you look at the national scene and you don't know what to do, you know, all politics is local, and it's going to affect all of us more than anyone else. So thank you for coming today. It's a very cold day. I appreciate the effort. Please stay informed. Please get on the list. If you haven't signed the petition, please do so. And it does take some money, so please contribute as your resources allow. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Will. Out in the lobby, I guess we can call it the lobby, outside the doors to the auditorium, you'll see these baskets, and if you fill out one of the volunteer forms, just drop it in one of these baskets. We'd appreciate that. That's where the buttons and the lawn signs are as well. And we've got the metal stakes for the lawn signs. You're probably not going to get those in the ground right now, but you can get but you can get creative and put those signs. You know, nail them to a you know, your front porch, or stick them in your window. If you have a business, put them in your business window. That's a great place for signs. So, Will mentioned Seneca Lake Guardian. My name is Joseph Campbell, and I'm the president of both Gas Free Seneca, the lead organization fighting the LPG storage on the south end of the lake, and I'm now president of Seneca Lake Guardian, and we're a Waterkeeper of Alliance affiliate. So our mission is to take a proactive role in preventing irresponsible and dangerous activity like this incinerator from negatively impacting the Finger Lakes region. So our focus goes a little beyond just LPG storage now and just Seneca Lake. I'll be the moderator for the remainder of this community forum. Seneca Lake Guardian is hosting this important event. I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank our co-sponsors. I know Cindy did earlier. Romulus residents opposed to trash trains, Finger Lakes Wine Business Coalition, Will, and others here. Vinny Alaperti and his wife Kim is on stage with us. The Sierra Club Atlantic chapter is here, as well as the Finger Lakes group, the Sierra Club Finger Lakes group. Seneca Jet, I'm going to murder it. Jet Do? Jet Do. Doe? I knew I was going to murder. The Finger Lakes Zero Waste Coalition, Seneca Lake Environmental, or Seneca Falls Environmental Action Committee, isn't it? And the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network. Hillary Lambert's here. I'm going to introduce Tom Bouchard. He wants to come up and make a brief statement. Tom is the chair of the Town of Romulus Planning Board. He just wants to make an announcement, I believe. Come on up, Tom. Yes.
Thank you, where's the speaker? Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Dr. Okay, we're good? All right.
Just talk. Just talk.
Just talk. Good. I can do that. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dr. Khan. Thank you all for being here today. I'm here to make an announcement regarding the Circular Energy Project. On Friday, January 8th, 2018, approximately 2:45 p.m., the town of Romulus received an email letter from Alan Knopf, the attorney for Circular Energy, indicating that they are withdrawing their special use permit application in favor of pursuing siting of their proposed incinerator through the Article 10 procedure of the New York State Public Service Commission. Let me read his letter in its entirety. And I'll have this available for people in the media later. Stated January 5th, 2018. Dear Tom, as you are aware, we are the attorneys for Circular Energy LLC, the applicant for the Circular Energy Facility Renewable Energy Project proposed in the town of Romulus at the former Seneca Army Depot. We write to you to withdraw the applicant's application for a special use permit from the town planning board. Based on the concerns raised by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation regarding the applicability of Article 10 of the Public Service Law, and their discussion with the Department of Public Service, Circular Energy has determined that it should not comply with should comply with Article 10. Article 10 will address all local ordinances and impact pursuant to Public Service Law Section 172I, which states that notwithstanding any other provision of law, no state agency, municipality, or agency thereof may, except as expressly authorized under this article by the board, require any approval, consent, permit, certificate, or other condition for the construction or operation of a major electric generating facility with respect to which an application, and it just trails off. He concludes, therefore, a special use permit from the planning board will not be required. He closes by saying, we appreciate the time and effort the planning board and town staff has spent on the application, and we are confident that all local concerns will be adequately addressed through the Article 10 process. However, since we know the planning board has questions about this project, so we still plan to attend your meeting on Monday night, January 8th, to answer questions from the planning board unless you advise otherwise. Thank you for your time and efforts. Yours truly, Alan J. Knopf. So, the planning board has received the confirmation that the applicant will appear before the board tomorrow night right here at 7 p.m. To answer questions from the planning board. What this new development represents to the town is unclear at this time, as both the planning and town boards must familiarize ourselves with the Article 10 law. What is clear, however, is the town's steadfast commitment to safeguard any intrusions or threats to our health and well-being for us and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We're going to hear from Attorney Will Burns, Burns Law Firm, in a minute. I just wanted to say that we're hoping to have a question and answer session. There's a microphone down front. If we could have an usher at the end of each aisle. If you have a question for the panel, come to the beginning of the aisle here, and we'll take turns going to the microphone and asking questions. Try to keep your questions short and to the point, and try not to just make statements. That's what the panel is here for. And from your left to right, we have Marianne Kowalski, who is a Romulus resident, and she's former president of Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. Well, wait a minute, okay. Former president of Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association. Now she's on the board of Seneca Lake Guardian. And to her left is Dr. Paul Connett. He needs no introduction. nor does Judith Enck. We've already heard their introductions. Kim Alapurdy is co-owner of Billsboro Winery, winner of the 2016 Governor's Cup, just recently elected, congratulations, to the Geneva Town Council. And Will Burns of Burns Law Firm. And if you'd like to come up now, Will.
We'll get to questions in a second. I'm an attorney, Will Burns. I've been practicing energy and environmental law and blocking microphones for 28 years. So I'm a litigator. I fight in court. I work for national environmental organizations. They talk about Earth Justice being involved. Earth Justice is working with us right now, and I've been working with Earth Justice for cases in front of the Public Service Commission for a number of years, and with a lot of national environmental groups. And what I do is I focus largely in the electric area to try and push for clean energy. And this is what we have in front of us is the exact opposite of clean energy, right? So, we had a late-breaking development on Friday that Tom Bouchard just told you about. I want to, can everybody give us a hand for the planning board members who are here? And also any other elected officials. I mean, this is a very important issue, but people should fight this project, I think, wherever it's taking place.
Yes.
If it's going to be under this Article 10, there's a role for the planning boards and the town boards to present their positions to show that their local zoning laws should still apply. If you noticed when the company was, the letter that was just read from the company, it sort of tries to not so subtly say, oh, your local laws are preempted by this Article 10. Well, that's just wrong. It's not right. It is not preempted. There are, I can tell you a little bit about preemption. Preemption is generally narrowly construed in the law. There are express provisions in this Article 10 that do provide for the possibility of some preemption of local laws, but I don't think they're going to apply in this case. I mean, all of it is designed to prevent local laws from dealing with, actual siting of electric generation. There are provisions in the Romulus zoning law which have nothing to do with, whether someone's going to have an electrical generation facility that should preclude this plant from going forward. So I think, even if this is in front of Article 10, the planning board is going to have a big role in this, and everybody ought to be going to the planning board meetings. You ought to all just put up a tent and come back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, or maybe go somewhere warmer. Even though it's a warm snap of 20 degrees, it's not really that warm out. But in any event, I wrote a letter on Friday asking people to go to the planning board meeting tomorrow and ask for two things. Well, one of those things was to deny the special use permit application. Well, the company, 3 hours after I wrote that letter, withdrew their applications. You don't have to ask them to do that. But there's a little bit of, and there's some discussion about possible impropriety in other cases, and there's a little bit of that ugliness that's kind of showed up in our little proceeding here as well, and that is there was, I don't know if you've been reading any of the news stories, but there was a zoning officer issued a couple of letters to the company earlier last year in March and in August, and in those letters he's purporting to say what's renewable energy under the zoning law regulations. Well, the problem is he didn't have authority to write that letter. He doesn't have authority to interpret the zoning regulations, just to enforce them as written. Another thing that happened is sometime after he wrote his first letter, he decided to sell his house. It's even closer than this school to the proposed incinerator site. He sold his house and moved like 35 miles away, or 35 minutes or something like that, according to the blog that I read. But in any event, Peter Mantius's blog, he's here tonight. He's written some really good articles. You should read them. But, in any event, it just seems odd that he decided to sell his house to someone and supposedly didn't tell the new owner that there was going to be a proposed incinerator 3,000 feet away when he sold his house. Now, on top of that, Mr. Mantius called the local Romulus attorney, Pat Morrell, and Pat Morrell supposedly helped Schrader draft these letters. Schrader is the zoning officer. Now, why is he helping him draft a letter that he has no authority sending, right? He should have said, well, I could draft a letter for you, but you can't sign it because you don't have the authority. Well, anyway, all of this is creating some sort of stir in the community that there's something afoul here, right? And I think it can be cleared up very simply. Everybody come back here tomorrow night, ask the planning board, Mr. Bouchard and his comrades, to write a letter saying, you know what? This guy didn't have authority to issue those letters, and that is not going to be our interpretation. And if someone wants an interpretation of the code, they can go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, to which Schrader is not a member of, and ask their opinion later on this year. So I urge you all to come back tomorrow night, ask the planning board to just start restoring a little public confidence, and, you know, that things are not as they seem. I think Mr. Bouchard and the planning board, I think they have their hearts in the right place. They really want to do the right thing. They really want to do due process, but they need to sort of correct this appearance of impropriety. So I urge you all to come back tomorrow night to do that. And then start going to the planning board meetings and the town board meetings. The town board is going to be meeting on the 17th. One of the things they're considering is a potential ban on, or a moratorium on solar projects. Well, that might be okay if it's really narrow, if it's short, but you know, there's a production tax credit which is at the federal level giving incentives for people to install solar. And I think, you know, you want to make sure that your town board is doing what you want, right? Now, solar might be something we want to encourage rather than a waste incinerator, for example. So you may want to show up at the meeting, voice your opinion on what you think of that. But it's important things happen at the local level, and at the planning board and the zoning board and the town board meetings, you should be showing up. Because there's going to be a lot of discussion of the zoning that's in place, maybe new zoning that might be used to try and fight this from coming back again. And you also want to encourage the planning committee and all the town boards. They should be defending the zoning that's on the books. They should be putting more zoning if you want it to prevent things like this from happening. And they should just be participating in the process wherever it is. And I think home rule is going to rule the day at the end of the day, and that we're going to have a say on whether this project goes forward. And it's going to be at the local level, so you have to show up and influence the planning committee and other committees to do that. So please participate. We're going to have some questions now. There's going to be, you know, obviously this process will go on for a while. We really appreciate you all coming out, and I want you to all stay involved. Every one of you is important. So thank you.
Will, I'm going to apologize. I completely blew your introduction, and so I'm going to back up a little bit because I want you to know who Will Burns really is. In addition to being an environmental and energy attorney and litigator and working closely with Earth Justice, Mr. Burns is also admitted to practice in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. He's also admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, and the U.S. District Courts for the Western District of Pennsylvania, the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and the District of New Jersey. He's been involved in litigation throughout the United States and Puerto Rico. Thank you, Will. So we do have time for a few questions. I know it's getting on toward 5 o'clock. We were supposed to wrap this up, but we can probably take a few questions. Sir, yeah.
Yes, I've got, can you hear me?
Yes.
Would someone on the panel
Get close to the microphone.
Please tell us maybe a little more about the corporations or the interests that are standing behind circular energy? Who are they?
There's not really much known about circular energy. It was formed, get here? Yeah. Well, other than they can't spell, They were incorporated as an LLC in January of last year. And as an LLC, they don't have to divulge who's behind them. The names that we've been able to identify are a number of people who have been involved in development projects around New York State, including Saratoga Springs and I believe in the city of Rochester. And according to local media reporting on those, this company gets a lot of its funding through the EB-5 visa program, which is where investors of $1 million in certain projects can get a green card for citizenship in the United States with an investment in certain projects. It's currently being investigated in investments from the Kushner Corporation in real estate, I believe in New Jersey. So other than that, we don't know that much about the project.
But we don't think the Kushner family is involved in this project. I just want to clarify that. But there is an EB-5 connection, and there was a really thorough article in Wall Street Journal yesterday about how the Kushner family may be abusing the EB-5 program.
In general terms, we've seen hundreds of proposals like this, where a group of people form a company. They've had no experience in incineration, gasification. They've never run a plant in their lives. They are frontmen. They are simply frontmen. If they make any progress at all towards the necessary permits, then they're more than likely sell this to a company that doesn't want to show its hand right now. And I think that's almost certainly Covanta. They try to get in without anybody knowing they're getting in. So that, I think, is what is going on. You're dealing with frontmen. They are promised the earth because they don't expect ever to operate this facility.
Hi. Oh, is this on?
Yeah, you have to be close to the mic.
Closer? Okay. This is a question for Judith and Will. I've been working for the past year and a half or so with a local group, Solar Seneca, that has worked with 7 municipalities in the southern part of Seneca County to do a solarized program. We work in my consulting company specifically with community solar projects. I want to caution people to be careful and ask specifically that New York City needs energy as well as getting rid of its trash. And from my perspective, this community would also be poorly served by a mega export facility for solar energy that was aimed at transmitting the power across power lines from here to New York City. Asking Judith specifically because I know Mark has been so active, and I assume you as well, around getting energy for New York City from offshore wind, which is what is sustainable and makes sense. An important thing to understand is in this community there are issues with voltage fluctuation. There are economic barriers because of the way the electric grid is currently arranged, and it's important to understand that if a large facility for export of solar energy were put on the Seneca Army Depot, that would not solve local problems, whereas small, appropriately sited solar, community-based, community-scale installations would. My assumption, don't know the folks from the planning board well, but have met them before and have seen them at work, is that their moratorium is intended for the purpose of determining where those sites might best be put. And before going and insisting that their moratorium is a bad idea, I'm wondering if you think it might be a good idea to have them explain what they're trying to do with it. Thank you.
Well, I think it's always good to have more information, and the local technical information's on transmission is important, and you need to know who's financing a project, but I actually really disagree. I think given what we are facing on climate change issues and air quality issues, I think we need small-scale solar projects, we need large-scale solar projects. They should be consistent with local requirements. The public should be fully involved in the decision-making. I do know that there is a movement across upstate New York, largely backed by the fossil fuel industry, to put moratoriums on solar development. I think that's a real problem. I think if you're serious about climate change, you have to embrace solar projects, wind projects, geothermal projects, fuel cell projects, added investments in energy efficiency, tidal projects, small-scale hydro projects. If we don't use our environmental leadership to get clean, renewable energy projects online and functioning, we're never going to deal with the climate crisis.
Jack?
Yes, hi. I'm an elected official across the lake, and I'm very concerned about what's happening around Title X being used to erase home rule. And I'm addressing this question primarily to the attorney, Mr. Burns. My understanding of Title X, it doesn't override the policing power of localities, which states that we as elected officials at the local level have not only the right but the duty to protect the health, safety, and welfare of every constituent living within our jurisdiction. And the fracking battle that was fought here in New York State has brought huge numbers of people to an awareness of local control and home rule usage around both zoning and policing power. Do you see that as one of the very pivotal pieces of this in saying no to this industry?
I think, yeah, I think it's still, home rule is still important. You know, there was,
Why don't we switch spots?
you know, I think home rule is still important. You know, the letter that was read to you by the chair of the planning board cited from section 172 of Article 10, which was in place in a previous version of Article 10. And, you know, there was case law that allowed sort of local requirements to prevent from, you know, an electrical generating facility from being located in New York City that was proposed and was new. And, you know, there's a new Article 10 with some other provisions, but, you know, as I read it, you know, first of all, there's a possibility of some preemption of local rules, but, you know, that's under Section 172, that's if you're, you know, you're requiring permits essentially for the construction or operation of a major electric generating facility. And that was the section that was in place before, when some local rules essentially ended up preventing this from happening in New York City. And there's another new section, which is 168.3E, which talks about the possibility also, again, but again, I think it's all, you know, that's tied to water, electric, sewer, telecommunication, fuel, and steam things that would be required for a major power plant. What this, I don't want to give away all of our secrets here, but so I won't. So I'll just say that as I read Article 10, home rule is still, should rule the day, you know? And so just keep on your board members to make sure that they, you know, they support the zoning law and they defend it and they participate in the Article 10 process. But I think, you know, unless the case law comes out to the contrary, I think we're in pretty good shape, even under Article 10, especially because there's a board under,
Albany.
Yeah, by the way, if you want to ask a question, you're supposed to come up here and talk to the ushers and stand in line like other people, and then you go to the mic, which doesn't work too well, and then you ask your question, and then you say, is the mic on, right? Okay. But there's a board that is set up that decides this. So it's a board made up of, I think, 5 members from different committees. So the Department of Environmental Conservation is involved, and they're supposed to be trying to combine new electric generation siting along with the environmental review takes place all in the same place. So it's this one board decides it, and there's some ad hoc members, which could and probably should include members of the planning board and other local elected officials. So anyway, it's a board made up of different agencies. It's not Public Service Commission. It's a couple people from all different agencies. You can.
I just want to add one point, especially for the planning board. When Circular Energy comes here tomorrow, it'd be good to ask them, even though they've withdrawn their variance request, will they comply with local requirements? Let's get that on the record and see what we're dealing with.
We probably have time for maybe 2 more questions. We're already over the 2-hour time frame that we had scheduled for this, so try to keep them short and to the point.
Yes, Paul, you mentioned that you've been involved in quite a few of battles against waste incinerators.
Close, yeah.
Yeah, you got to
Get
talk
real
right into the
I don't
mic.
know if it's even on.
There you go.
Is it now on? Okay. Paul, you've been involved in quite a few campaigns against waste incinerators. And if this battle goes more statewide, just like the fracking battle, it's not just stopping the damage, it's doing things differently by not needing, fracked gas in the first place. So in this case, most of the waste is coming from far away. So how, in other campaigns, when the waste is so far from where it's burned, and zero waste programs in Seneca County, aren't going to be the key to solving the problem, how do we bust into the New York City political and media market to cast a little shade on their lack of recycling programs and composting programs? They're just nowhere near what they need to be.
That is a very, very good question. The only good thing about incinerators is lazy politicians. Lazy politicians just want to get rid of the waste. They don't want to educate the public and so on. So that's what we're fighting, lazy politicians in New York City and other populations in the state, in addition to the greed of the corporation that wants to do this. All I can say is that in terms of politics, the most unpopular thing about incineration is when the public sees waste imported into the area. Most people take the attitude, look, if this is to solve our local waste problem and we can't do anything else, this is the only thing, they won't oppose it. But the moment it's seen, as waste is seen to flow from all parts of the state, and it's being done for profit, not in their interest, then politically you will have a lot of allies in this whole region. They will oppose it because it involves importation of waste. But the good news is there are 3 places right now which you should be looking at. One is San Francisco with source separation of organics, which are then composted. Another big city which is also doing this is Milan in Italy. They have a very good source-separated organic collection, very efficient. And the people that have been behind that are also working in New York City to do the same in New York City. They are trying to get source separation of organics going in New York City. So there is hope there. We got to encourage them.
And I would just add that, look, I think this is a very well-informed and dynamic community, and I think in the end you're going to win. It's a matter of how long is it going to take. And what may happen is you're really effective, and then the proposal goes 30 miles, in any different direction. So it would be really good to also do a campaign requesting that Governor Cuomo establish a moratorium on new incinerators anywhere in New York. And putting state funds into zero waste composting and recycling programs. I think that's a real positive that can come out of your eventual success here.
One last question, and before we, if you haven't already signed our petition, please make sure you do on your way out. I urge you to take lawn signs. I urge you to take buttons. The more visible this is, the better our chances are of beating this down. And go ahead and then we'll close this.
To somebody's point in the back about the emails and who's on the siting board, we've already inundated the town board, Romulus Town Board, and the planning board with emails, I think all in the opposition. Would it make sense, would it be effective to start turning that campaign toward the siting board members of the PSC and start sending all of them letters? And they're on the internet. If you Google PSC electrical generation, they'll come up. And should we start sending letters to every one of those?
Yes.
Okay, you heard it.
David, put a list together if you can, email addresses, physical addresses, names, and we'll get the word out. You know, we have our email list. Hopefully, everybody signed up for or signed the petition, gave their email address so you can get updates. And don't forget, social media is really big.
Well, you should also don't forget the locals throughout this process. They should be. You know, I heard at one point someone said, "Oh, we're only getting 2 emails an hour instead of 50." So maybe interest is waning. So don't let them think that interest is waning at the local level. Make sure you keep them involved. Also, it's not just the Public Service Commission. It's the New York State Board on Electric Generator Siting. The Public Utility Commission in New York deals with a lot of electrical issues that have nothing to do with generation siting. So make sure you have the right list of who you send it to. So.
Yeah, we'll circulate it.
Yeah.
There's another very simple thing that everybody can do. A red ribbon. I don't think you're using red ribbons for anything locally. You put a red ribbon on your car aerial, put a red ribbon on your post box, put a red ribbon anywhere that's visible. Trust me, when you are driving through a town, it's such strong psychology to keep seeing the lawn signs, the bumper stickers, but the simplest thing to do is red ribbon. Everywhere you see that, it's saying no to the incinerator.
Okay.
A nice fashion statement to your hair.
Yeah, in your hair. And I do want to sing my song before you go.
Oh, do you need your computer plugged in?
No, I don't need that. I can do it from memory.
All right. We're going to hopefully give one big round of applause again for Dr. Connett. And Judith, thanks. I recall speaking with Judith on the phone back in 2009 over the Chesapeake Energy wanted to turn a depleted gas well in the town of Pulteney into a deep injection well for fracking waste from Pennsylvania. And I talked to Judith Think on the phone. The rest of our panel, and most especially all the people that worked really hard as ushers, working the tables, passing the donation buckets and the petitions around. They're your friends, they're your neighbors, they live here, they're invested in this fight. So, Dr. Connett, lead us in song.
Yeah, you know the tune and you can sing the chorus. Whilst we recognize our landfills all are swelling with the waste, it doesn't justify a bad decision made in haste. Let us put our heads together so the problem may be faced, and we must do it now. We don't want incineration. We don't want incineration. We don't want incineration. We know there's a better way. Mine eyes have seen the garbage that's a-burning on the grate. And lest we'd wish the dangers we had better separate. For the words. But the chorus is a great marching song, as you know. We don't want incineration.
Yeah.
We don't want
incineration. We don't want incineration.
We know there's a better way. Thank you very much.
Now playing in the Catskills.
Thank you all for coming out tonight.
Positive ending.
Well, if any, yeah, just, very nice, thank you.